أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. Alhamdulillah, we are beginning another session of Mizan Live, and I would like to welcome everyone who is tuning in to this session. Alhamdulillah, this week we held a course in Atlanta. I just want to thank the brothers and sisters who were there and made it happen for their hospitality. It was I had a wonderful time. I love it when the community is a lively one and energetic, asks questions and all that. And to be honest, I just like it when they give me a hard time. So I just wanted to thank everyone for that. Continuing our discussions on the Shia Imamiyyah doctrine, we've covered almost about 30 of the articles of the book of Ayatullah Subhani. Assalamu alaikum, everybody who is tuning in, Sister Mahnaz, Sister Safina, Brother Bilal, everybody. And welcome. So last session, what we covered about 3 or 4 articles. Number 1 was article number 29, about Tawhid and qualities, and Allah having one essence and many qualities deriving from Him. And that was explained how this whole idea of this whole issue in the past in classical theology that we've had, where some people thought that since God's qualities are eternal just like His essence, then there must be more entities out there in addition to His own essence. And so we have 7 or 8 of the eternal entities like God. So that, as I said before, I don't think anyone will have that issue in this day and age. We look at God's essence, so to speak, and we're able to derive certain qualities from that essence of His. It doesn't mean that now His essence multiplies or anything like that. So that was Article 29. Article 30 was Tawhid in creation, and how God, when He's the only one who actually creates. And we had some verses on that. And then also the fact that God creates and God is the cause of everything coming into existence doesn't go against the law of causality either. That was also explained. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Zainab and Sister Sharmeen, and welcome. And then we had a verse there's many verses in the Quran, but a verse that he brought to support the idea that the law of causality is not affected negatively in any way and is not disproven in any way if we believe in Tawhid in creation, and that God is the only independent creator. Okay. And the last point that he made in that article was that we don't want to sound like man has no free will either. Look, when we say God is the number one creator, He might be the creator, but also there's another part to the cause of things coming into existence. Sometimes it's our will too. So God will create things out of His own will, but then when it comes to our actions, for example, and things that we do, our will and our decisions, our choices also will play a role in that. So we are part of the cause as well. But we can't ever think that we're the independent cause either. Article 31 spoke about and entered the whole topic of Tawhid in Rububiyyah. Tawhid in managing the affairs of this dunya and running the show, so to speak, right? So that was spoken about. Now, managing and running affairs is of 2 types. Number 1, it can either be takwini or it can be tashri'i. In Article 31, he spoke about the takwini form of management of the universe. So, for example, everything that's working, all the fine-tuning that we see in the universe, all of that goes back to Him, and He's the only one behind all of it. Yumsik as-sama an taqa'a ala al-ard, he says, for example. I'm the one who hold the heavens from collapsing, or the sky to collapse on the earth. So while we think that, okay, it's gravity and orbit and all of that keeps things from crashing into each other, at the end of the day, Allah in the Quran says, look, I'm at the top of all of this. I am the one running the show. I am the one managing the affairs of creation in this universe, in this material realm. Alright? So takween comes from kaun, existence. The management of existence is on him. Okay. Then we moved on to article. There were lots of verses that we covered here, by the way, about how Allah is the one who runs everything. We had stories from Prophet Yusuf. We had stories from our Prophet. We had verses that spoke about how some people, the mushrikeen of the past, their problem wasn't that they put gods and idols next to Allah in all of His attributes. The problem with the people of that time was that they believed that the idols, or whatever it was that they were worshipping, are independent when it comes to having an effect on this physical material universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, everything, I am also involved. You cannot ascribe partners to me when it comes to the rububiyyah of this earth and of this universe. Yeah, they would pray to the idols thinking that the idols are the ones running the show. God created. So it's interesting. There's a misunderstanding that people have sometimes, is that they think that mushrikeen of that time of the Holy Prophet, they believed in more than one God, meaning there was other gods next to Allah in all of His attributes, even when it came to creation, for example. But the verses of the Quran told us that no. If you ask the mushrikeen who created, they'll say Allah. Okay, well, if Allah created, He's also the one who manages. Why do you go to idols when it comes to now running the show, when it comes to managing the affairs of the universe? No. If He created, creation and management are going to be part and parcel of the same entity. You can't separate the two. Unless that Lord delegates to others. But Allah in the Quran clearly states that I haven't told you to worship these idols. Who said these idols are in charge of anything? You made them out of your own hands. So how can they don't even have free will, let alone anything else. So Brother Bilal asks, so whose contribution adds greater to the cause and ultimately leads to the effects or consequences? God's will or our free will? Very, very good question. Right now, as we speak theoretically and conceptually, right, Allah is part of the cause, we are also part of the cause. In other words, if I don't will it, it's not going to happen. Allah has given permission for things to happen in this universe. But they'll only happen sometimes if my will and my choice, my decision is behind it as well. So I'm part of it, He's part of it. Take me out of the equation, it won't happen. Take Allah out of the equation, it won't happen. So that's on paper, brother. That's in theory, okay? But there are great individuals and urafa that reach a certain point where they'll see how much of an influence God has on everything. For me and for a person like me, for now, all I need to know is, okay, my decision plays a role. But those who are urafa, those who are abds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they reach, through servitude of Allah, through worship of Allah, through obedience of Allah, reach a point where they feel how much God has a say in everything. Right? And if you were to explain that to someone who hasn't reached such a level, they'll say, oh, there's no free will anymore. Yeah, so these are levels that people have to reach to understand. For now, in the books, this is how it's going to be. When we read, they'll tell us that we are part of the illah, part of the cause. Allah's will is also there. You can't neglect that. Okay? Alright, so lots of verses we had regarding how the mushrikeen would take mudabbirs other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that was the main problem. مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ لِيُقَرِّبُونَا إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We only worship because they get us closer to Allah. Allah says, hey, who told you that? You can't make stuff up like that. Until today, the Shia do certain things and they say, oh, this is just for us to get closer to Allah. But those things are maybe even culturally made and innovated. They're not something that Islam has necessarily prescribed. So we have to be very careful to stick to our ulama, who of course they themselves, they stick to the ahadith and the Quran, and they understand what Allah wants from us and what can get us closer to Him and what has not been prescribed by the religion. Okay, So that's a quick overview of what we covered last time. Salam alaikum, Sister Nazneen, and welcome. Alright, so we move on now to Article 32. So if anyone tunes in just now, they haven't missed anything new. We are moving into our discussion. Article 32 is a continuation in reality of Article 31. Article 31 spoke about Tawhid Rububi, Tawhid of God being Rabb and the one who runs everything in the universe and takes care of everything in the universe. But the Takwini side of it. Now we want to talk about the Tashri'i side of things. That Allah is also the Mudabbir. He is also the Lord. He is also the Rabb when it comes to the Tashri'i side of things. God's legislative commands. God saying the do's and the don'ts. God allowing certain things and not permitting certain things. Brothers and sisters, let me quickly explain this. You've probably heard this before. There's a difference between Takween and Tashri'. Takween has nothing to do with our free will. It's how Allah does things when it comes to creation and existence. For example, when Allah commands for something to be, and it is. إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونَ. Allah commands that be, and then it is. I ask you, when Allah makes that command, does that thing have any choice, any decision in coming into existence or not? Of course it doesn't. When Allah wills something, it happens. That's in the realm of Takween, in the dimension of Takween. But there are some commands of Allah that are not Takweeni commands. They are Tashri'i commands. It comes from Sharia. Okay? It is the do's and don'ts. It's the laws. When it comes to those things, we have a choice. We can choose to obey, and we can choose to disobey. It's up to us. These are Tashri'i commands. Okay? So Allah says do salat. Allah says fast. Okay? Now, we want to see who has the right to do Tashri'. Who has the right to issue do's and don'ts to people? Is it anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Article 32 talks about this one. It talks about Tadbir at-Tashri'i, or the Tashri'i authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah is the only one who can say that certain things are to be done and certain things are not to be done, or to be refrained from. Allah has the right to governance and to rule. He has the right to legislate and prescribe. He has the right to be obeyed, or not right, he has the authority to be obeyed. He has also the authority to allow shafa'ah and intercession of others, or to not allow it. He's the one who can forgive and can not forgive. All of these fall under that jurisdiction of Allah, to the Tashri'i jurisdiction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brother asks, the laws of science and universe, is that Tashri'i? No. That is Takweeni. So for example, it has to do with existence, it has to do with laws of nature, it has to do with universe and creation and existence. When you let something go, alright, gravitational pull will pull it drops. These are Takweeni laws, okay? Takweeni laws. Tashri', just always remember, if you want to be able to tell the difference between the two, ask yourself, when a command like this comes, or when a law like this comes, is there a possibility of going against that law or not? Okay? So when you drop something, it falls, unless you catch it with your other hand, right? Or you put something under it, But if there's nothing under an object that you're holding and you drop it, it falls. That's gravitational pull. These are Takweeni laws. All the way to the point, even when it comes to the existence of things, when God wants something to come to existence, He says be, and it comes into existence. He doesn't have to verbalize be, kun. He wills it and it comes into existence. This is a Takweeni command. It has to do with the existence of that thing. Versus legislative laws, legal laws that we have that are binding on us, but at the end of the day, we can or cannot go by them. Yeah? So like salat, like fasting and those things. These legal rights and laws. Okay? I hope that clears it up a little bit, if you want to tell the difference between these two. Okay. And if you need me to explain more, please don't hesitate. Alright, so Allah has authority when it comes to all of these things. Who to forgive, whose intercession to allow and permit, and so on. who to command to do things, and who not to command to do things. Things like that. All of that belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He brings a verse. He brings a verse to explain that even if the Prophet is the one telling you what to do and what not to do, that's even with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah has the authority to legislate, He has that authority, He can delegate it to the Holy Prophet. He can delegate it to anyone He likes. But independently and originally it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see how Tawhid digs its roots deep into every aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only one in everything. He's the only one to be the origin of laws, of commands that are tashri'i. He's the only one when it comes to existence itself. Nothing else independently exists. He's the only one that exists when it comes to qualities. His qualities are derived from Him. Or else it's just Him. It's all just one. And that's Allah. Okay, so He gives this example in Surah Nisa verse 80. It says, فَمَنْ أَطَاعَ الرَّسُولِ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. To explain and to illustrate how, even if the Prophet is to be obeyed, it's because obeying him is equal to obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَمَنْ أَطَاعَ الرَّسُولِ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. So whomever or whosoever obeys the Rasul and the Messenger, فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. They have verily indeed obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because Allah, as the origin of all authority and all legislation, has delegated this to the Holy Prophet. And that, O Prophet, you let the people know what they have to do and what they're supposed to refrain from. So if you obey him, because I've given him permission, you've obeyed me, Allah. Yeah. Another verse that he brings. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَّسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Oh man, so beautiful. Really, it corroborates what Ayatullah Subhani is saying here. That Tawhid, when it comes to legislative authority, means that He's the only one. And if anyone else is doing that, it's because of His authority. Because of Allah's original authority. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَّسُولٍ. We did not send a messenger, any messenger, except إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ. Except that for the purpose of them being obeyed. Okay? But obeyed, why? Because he's an authority himself? No. إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. By the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's beautiful. Surah Nisa verse 66. In other words, if the permission of Allah wasn't there, who was the Prophet even to think that he has to be obeyed? Okay? He goes on. He says, we have a question. Let me just read it first and then. Brother says, Shaykh, I've always been curious. When Allah wills something into existence, where does it come from? What does that mean? Out of nothing? Oh man, that's a tough one. How creation works? Yeah, I mean, in the Quran, the word fatir is used. When you look at fatir versus khaliq, fatir and fatara means to bring out of nothingness, to split, to cut into non-existence as if, and bring out of non-existence, existence. Okay? Assalamu alaikum, Brother Nadir. Last week he said salam. I forgot to say salam back to him, so I'll say salam twice. Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Nadir. Alright. Fatir versus khaliq, there's a difference between the two. Khaliq means, okay, create. Okay, so you can also create things out of, like, I don't know, you can create a table out of wood, so to speak, right? But when it comes to fatir, it means, they usually in the tafasir, when you look, this is how they do tafsir of it. They say to bring out of nothing something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brings out of nothingness something. Now someone might ask, well, does that mean everything that exists right now was created like that? No. Right? This baby giraffe came out of its mommy. So the mommy was the one who gave birth to it. True. But let's go all the way back. The number one thing that was created in this way, so to speak. Right? And that was all of matter together. The material universe together, all together was created. Now, some might believe in the Big Bang, some might believe in other things. Whatever it is, that number one point where we start, creation starts, it came out of nothing at the end of the day. Now, there's a lot more to say here, and I'm trying to keep it simple, right? Was there a time that there was no matter? No. We have to talk about that, But those are all that has to do with more details. That's more of an EIS thing that needs to be covered. So I'll leave it at that. How creation works itself is something very beautiful, I think, and it's something that's worth looking into, reading more. And our ulama have books on those. Inshallah, maybe someday in the future we can cover things more in detail. Okay. So going back to what we were talking about. He says, Ayatullah Subhani goes on to say, since Allah is the one to legislate, then no one has the right to judge except by what Allah has prescribed. Yeah? وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. You can't just be like, okay, God sent down laws, but when it comes to me living my life or judging people, or calling shots and stuff, I'm just going to do it the way I want to do it. No, if God is the number one and original and primary authority and only sole authority, that means when it comes to anything that has to do with people, when it comes to judgment and all of that, also it has to be judged by what Allah has sent down. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ, whosoever judges or whosoever doesn't judge by what Allah has revealed and sent down, so those are the kafirun. Those are the ones who are kafir. Okay. And once again, this verse that he brings, there's a lot of more explanation here about judgment and, where are God's laws supposed to be implemented and so on. In the West right now, it's irrelevant. God's laws and things like that. It's talking about, the primary place where that happens is where the majority are Muslim and they want Islamic law to be implemented there. Okay, that was Surah Ma'idah, verse 44. He gives another verse, another example for shafa'ah and for the forgiveness of sins through intercession. He gives Surah Baqarah, verse 255 as an example. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. This is famous, we know it's Ayatul Kursi. That who is the one? In other words, no one can do shafa'ah and intercession in the presence of Allah except with His permission. You can't mess around on the Day of Judgment. People can't just intercede just like that. Everything happens through Him and His permission. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Dawood, and welcome, brother. Welcome. Or Surah Anbiya, verse 28, لا يشفعون إلا لمن ارتضى. They can't do shafa'ah and intercession except the ones whom Allah is satisfied with them doing intercession and gives permission to them, or else who are you to do intercession? In other words, when it comes to these things, there's also Tawhid, the origin. In reality, it's as if Allah is the one who is doing shafa'ah, but He's doing it through others and giving permission to others. So He's on the top. Tawheed, even in shafa'ah, even in forgiveness of sins. And so it's interesting how Ayatullah Subhani here, he takes advantage of this part of the discussion that we're in. And he says, hey, if Allah is if Tawheed is in shafa'ah as well, and allowing intercession and forgiveness of sins, so it's very clear that we don't believe in what the Christian faith promotes, where we have confession to the Father or to the priest and so on. We don't believe in that. And he brings a verse, فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ. So ask forgiveness for their sins. وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبِ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And who is the one who is to forgive sins except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah is the one who forgives sins. So he uses this verse to disprove what we have in the Christian faith. But personally, very humbly, I'm going to say this, that I think we need to look into what the Christian faith says more. Even when a person comes and confesses to the priest, Do they really believe that He is forgiving their sins? Or no, He is a means through God forgiving their sins. And God has given this permission in their faith, of course. We don't believe in this, but in their faith, is it that God has given permission for the priest to forgive their sins? Anyway, we don't want to be unfair here. Yeah. But all in all, of course, this we all know that when it comes to confession, this is not something that is sanctioned in Islam and in the Islamic faith. All right. So to wrap it all up, even when it comes to authority of and legal legislation and who's calling the shots when it comes to the do's and don'ts of the people and judgment and all of these things, plus forgiveness of sins, plus shafa'ah and intercession and all the good stuff, all of this goes back to Allah and Allah alone. He's the only independent entity that can allow any of that. And since He is the only independent entity that allows any of that, everything that happens by the means of others with His permission, in reality, is His and belongs to Him originally. Okay? So he concludes with this line. Let me read off of the book in English. With this line, he says, taken into consideration what has been said, a believer in the oneness of God must recognize that God alone is the source of authority and the sole governor in respect of all matters concerning religion, unless God Himself appoints someone to enforce and explain the religious obligations laid down by Him. That's beautiful. Alhamdulillah. All right. This is what the believers, what the urafa, what the spiritual wayfarers are after. Just Tawhid. Reach a point where you understand, where you experience, you taste that He is everything. That's what we're after. And it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with reading books. It happens through continuous obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fulfilling His will till He feels that, okay, you're ready and deserving now, and He gives us that light and puts it in our heart. Or else we cannot obtain this experiencing and tasting of Tawheed through reading books or Mizan live sessions. All right, Article 33. Article 33 talks about another form of Tawheed. And that is Tawheed fil ibadah. Tawheed in worship. If you remember, I said last week, I kind of just, passed by, and just in passing I said it, how some other Muslims sometimes will falsely accuse the Shia school of shirk. Yeah, unfortunately. And the reason for that is they'll tell us that, oh, you're calling on your saints. Yes, you're calling on your imams or the Holy Prophet to do things for you or to fulfill certain needs of yours. Yeah, this is against Tawheed in Rububiyyah. Yeah. Now, of course, the Shia school has answers to that, but this is not the place for it. So that's one form of false accusation that we have towards us. Now, to make things even worse, this form of Tawheed, sometimes the Shia school is accused of not having and failing to secure. Tawheed fil ibadah. Once again, if people were to understand how the Shia school looks at things and sees things, although I do have to admit some of the practices of the Shia lay people sometimes are not very kosher when it comes to Islam, and might give Shiaism a bad name, unfortunately. But all in all, if people out there were to understand what the scholars of the faith are saying, they would see that Tawheed, as a matter of fact, the deepest versions of Tawheed and the deepest and purest forms of Tawheed, the Shia school enjoys that. Okay, so anyway, having said that, let's talk about this a little bit. This form of Tawheed, Tawheed fil ibadah, Tawheed in worship, he says that it is common amongst all Abrahamic faiths again. So you see that concept again. He's repeating himself. We had this in Tawheed in essence, if I remember correctly, and now we have it in Tawheed in worship. That look, When it comes to worship of God, all Abrahamic faiths, this is a common theme in all of them, that all the Abrahamic faiths came down to tell the people that you worship one God, and one God alone. And by the way, this Tawhid in worship and Tawhid in lordship and rububiyyah and governance and management of the universe, these two are going to be very intertwined, as you shall see. Okay, so keep that in mind. It says, he brings a verse in the Quran, from the Quran, to just, to support this idea. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتِ. That we sent in every nation and amongst every nation a messenger. With what message? أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, he's translating اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ in this verse as worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Nahl, verse 36. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Shuja, welcome. Alright, or Surah Fatiha, that we recite every day 10 times at least in our wajib salats. Iyyaka na'budu, only you do we worship. That's one of the most important themes of Islam. Such, to the extent that it is repeated at least 10 times, because we read Surah Fatiha in every one of our 5 daily salats, we recite it at least twice. So that's 2 times 5 equals 10. So brother asks, can you summarize Tawheed Subabiha? Again, I don't know what that means, Subabiha. Is that a typo? I don't know. If you could explain what you mean by that. Alright, so this is Tawheed in Ibadah, in worship. Now let me read off of the book here. I like the wording. He says, I'm just trying to find it. Okay. He says, therefore. Okay, brother Bilal, you're saying it was a typo. Subabiha. I still don't know what you're saying. I'm sorry. We haven't covered anything like that so far. Never heard of that word. So if you can explain more. All right. So he says, therefore, there is no doubting the fact that God alone is to be worshipped and that the worship of anything else is prohibited. Nobody opposes this fundamental principle of religion. Insofar as there is debate on this subject, it concerns the status of other acts. This is important here. It says, look, no one has a problem, has an issue, and objects to the fact that you are not supposed to worship anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everyone knows that. Salam, Brother Muhammad Hussein. Welcome. Everyone knows you're supposed to only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are certain things people do that might cause issues, that might label them as people who do not have Tawheed when it comes to worship of God. That's why he says, insofar as there is debate on this subject, if there is any debate on this subject, it concerns the status of other acts, namely, whether the performance of these acts be considered as evidence of worship of other than God or not. In order to arrive at a definitive judgment as regards this question, we must provide first a logical definition of worship and then clearly separate those acts which can properly be assumed within this definition from those acts which pertain, on the contrary, to veneration and revering, ta'zim and takreem. Alright, let me explain. So what's going on here is, that he says, look, if we want to figure out these acts that certain people do sometimes and see if they are shirk or not, and if they compromise Tawhid in worship or not, what we have to do is first define worship itself. Then, once we define worship itself, we can make the decision. We can discern between what it falls under worship and what falls under ta'zeem, veneration, takreem, to honor and revere. So he says, let's talk about the definition first. What is the definition of ibadah, of worship? Important. He says, let me bring it up. He says worship means that worship which only Allah deserves and no one else should be worshipped through, is when a person exhibits humility, exhibits lowliness in front of something else with this intention and this understanding, with this conviction that in that thing, that object, that person, that whatever it is, has an independent say in what happens in this world, or maybe let me add to that, in the hereafter. Any independence, if in your mind for a split second you have this understanding, you have this conviction that this person that I am, for example, prostrating to, this person is independent when it comes to my felicity in this world or the hereafter, is independent when it comes to affecting me and my life in this world or the hereafter. If you have that in mind as you are exhibiting humility, and you're, for example, prostrating, if you have that in mind, that's where we have a problem. That's called worship. To have that in mind while you're doing something, doing an action. Usually it's prostration or bowing down or things like that, right? So this doesn't mean, for example, if someone's takes karate lessons or taekwondo lessons, and before they actually spar with each other, they bow down to each other or something like that, or sometimes they even fall to their knees, that this is, shirk necessarily. Why? Because what they're doing is not with that conviction or that intention or that understanding that this individual is independent when it comes to my felicity. As a matter of fact, the guy bows to the other guy and beats the heck out of him when they're sparring with each other. You know what I'm saying? It happens in MMA too. They kill each other, like they get close to destroying each other, and they're bloody head to toe. And by the way, look how low mankind has fallen, that this is how mankind is entertained now, to watch these things. But anyway, that's beyond our discussion right now. They beat each other up so much. So this bowing down, of course, is not because this person believes that, the person that I'm bowing to is independent when it comes to my felicity. Independently can have an effect on my life and on the universe or anything like that. But this was the problem with the mushrikeen of the Prophet's time. So this is where you see the Tawhid in Tadbir, or the Tawhid in Lordship and being Rabb, is intertwined with Tawhid in worship. They would worship them with what intention? With what conviction? That these idols actually have an independent effect on the earth that we live on, or the universe and the skies that we're under. So that was the problem. And in effect, their tawheed of ibadah is affected as well. Alright, let's read on now. He says, taking full cognizance of this principle, this is very important. I'm going to read a lot here and explain as I go on. Super important. Taking full consideration of this principle, one is in a better position to evaluate the respect and veneration accorded by Muslims in holy places to the saints, awliya, not the New Orleans saints, the saints meaning awliyaullah. Those brought close to Allah, those close ones up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, if we keep this principle in mind, he says, that's when we can understand why people do certain things that they do. It is obvious that the kissing of the holy tomb of the Prophet, or expressing joy on the anniversary of his birth, for God's sake, like this kills me every time I hear about it, that celebrating the Prophet's birthday is shirk. What kind of shirk? We're happy that the Prophet was born, man. It's not nothing complicated. We're not worshipping anything or anybody. Like what? Or expressing joy on the anniversary of his birth, or on the anniversary of the advent of his mission, the bi'thah or the mab'ath. All are aspects of the reverence and love which are due to the Prophet. They are not in the least derived from any belief in his divinity. In like manner, such acts as the chanting of poems praising the exemplary lives, or lamenting the death of the saints, the preservation of all monuments left as traces of the prophetic mission, like the harams of the imams and so on, the building of of mausoleums above the graves of holy personages, none of these acts can be called shirk, nor can they be called bid'ah. They are not to be equated with shirk because their source is love and affection for the saints of God, and not a belief in their divinity. This is the underlying principle here. For something to become shirk is if there is any form of divinity involved. But there is no, for those who revere these people in their life, after their life, it's not with the intention or conviction that these are their divinity or deities. Na'udhu billah. We seek refuge in Allah from all of that. The most someone can say, let me just say this by the way, the most someone can say is that, wait, these things are not shirk, but Allah doesn't want us to do them. I'll talk about that later a little bit if we get a chance. Alright, so Brother Muhammad Hussein is asking, what is the name of the book that you're reading? This is what it's called. Doctrines of Shi Islam by Ayatullah Subhani. There is a digital version online somewhere. Hopefully you can find it. But some people have ordered this online too, and they have received it. Brother Shuja, what was the prostration of the angels and the prostration of Yusuf? That's also something we'll explain. Alright. They are not to be equated with shirk because their source is love and affection for the saints of God and not a belief in their divinity. Neither can they be regarded as bid'ah, since these actions are rooted in a principle enshrined in the Quran and Hadith. That is, the necessity of loving and honoring the Prophet and his family. Our acts of reverence towards the Prophet on the occasion of his birthday and the onset of his mission in the bi'thah are but the expression of the outpouring of our love for him. Okay? And this is in stark contrast. In stark contrast to this is the prostration of the polytheists before their idols, what I was talking about a few minutes ago, which is rejected and forbidden precisely because it springs from a belief in the divinity and authority of the idols, and from the false supposition that they exercise control over part of man's destiny. That's the important part. For the idolaters believe that their idols have, at the very least, the power to glorify or abase, to forgive and to grant intercession, and that is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the problem with the polytheists. Brother Shuja, you asked about the angels and the prostration of Yusuf alayhi salam. I think he also mentions this. I don't know if I skipped it or not. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Give me a second. Yeah, he does mention it. He says, when he's talking about how this conviction wasn't there when the angels prostrated, or when Prophet Yusuf prostrated. Prophet Yusuf prostrated, the Quran says, but it doesn't say he prostrated towards his father because he's worshipping his father, or he feels that his father is divinity and deity. No. That's the way. Even right now, when we pray towards the Kaaba, brothers and sisters, are we praying towards the Kaaba because we worship the Kaaba? Or no, it's a command by Allah that we should worship in that direction. We worship in that direction, and we don't believe that those stones there are divinity, or that that's God's house or something. No, it's a place that is blessed, Allah has blessed, and Allah has prescribed that we pray in the direction of. Very simple. So, once you take out that understanding, that misunderstanding of divinity, deity, independent effect, and all of that from that which you are revering and venerating, it doesn't become shirk anymore, because the Tawhid and Ibadah is there. Why? Because it's not Ibadah to begin with. You're not doing Ibadah. It's not worship. The only time you have compromised Tawhid in worship is when you are worshipping other than Allah. But if you're doing something else for other than Allah, which is not worship, then you have Tawhid fil ibadah. You have not compromised that. Okay, having said all of that though, I do have to make one point here. Sometimes something in and of itself is not shirk. I want you to pay attention to this. Oh, look at that. One of the brothers put the link there to the PDF. All right. So sometimes what you're doing in and of itself is not shirk. What you're doing in and of itself is not ibadah. Right? Why? Because you don't have the intention of worshipping. You don't have the intention of this person deserving worship. You're just doing it for respect. So for example, you might, as I said, in a karate match or something, you might bow down to the guy that's in front of you. Right? Okay. But just because something in and of itself is not shirk and does not compromise your tawheed in worship, doesn't mean that it's necessarily a halal act either. Okay? Let me explain a little more. Sometimes what I do is worship because I have that bad intent, that wrong intention. Okay, that goes to the side. Sometimes I don't have that intention. It's a karate match and I'm just bowing down. Alright, that is not shirk. But some of our hadith or verses of the Quran might tell us that don't do such a thing. Don't do such a thing. In other words, if you do it, you have committed a haram act. You have committed a haram act. You haven't become mushrik. You have not compromised your tawheed because you didn't have that intention or conviction that, oh, I'm worshipping. But for example, Islam might say, I'm just speaking theoretically here. I'm not saying this is necessarily the case. Each person has to see what their marja' taqleed says. But it's not unlikely, it's not impossible for the Imams or the Prophet or the Quran to tell us, don't do certain acts when it comes to people. For example, hey, can I just just play, do sajda towards my friend? Yeah? Islam might say, don't do that at all. It's haram to do something like that. Not because it's shirk. If you have the intention of worshipping, then it's shirk. Definitely, it's a problem. But even if you don't have the intention of worship and deity and divinity, still Islam might make it haram to do such a thing. Now, it might be haram in and of itself. Like Islam might just say, hey, it's haram to prostrate towards anybody. Okay? Or Islam might say, it's haram to prostrate towards anybody if it is deemed or seen as worshipping that person, even if you didn't have that intention. Yeah? So here, Islam might still make something haram even though it's not shirk. Okay? Having said all that, am I trying to say that we have such a law in Islam? I'm not saying that at all right now. That's something that we have to go and ask our maraji' taqleed to see if there is anything in Islam that says that. Okay, so that's one thing. What I can say for sure though is this: that sometimes you don't have that intention, you don't have that conviction and understanding of divinity. But Islam will say, if it gives Islam a bad image, or if it gives the Shia a bad image, to the extent that people say that what we're doing is worship of something, then Islam might say, okay, to preserve the image of Shiism, stop that mustahab practice. Maybe. I'm just speaking theoretically here. It really depends. We have to see what the fatwas and the verdicts of our maraja' are in this regard. Okay, having said all of that, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm not going to move on to the next article. As a matter of fact, we move into part 3 of the book. Part 3 has to do with the qualities of God. So we're moving on from Tawhid, which had different forms and categories, now moving on into his qualities. So he's going to talk about his knowledge, Allah's power, and so on. Okay, so that is a new discussion I'm going to leave for our next session. Now, brothers and sisters, please just remember, this coming Wednesday, next week, we're not going to have a session because we have a program in our center that I have to go to. So next Wednesday, the 20th of February, there is no Mizan live session. The next session will be, inshallah, February 27th, and that's where we will continue where we left off tonight. So brother Muhammad Hussein, you saying, so if it seemed as if you're worshipping something, then it's not recommended, even if that's not your niyyah. That's all I'm saying is that's something to ask your marja'. Salamun alaikum, my dear beloved marja' taqleed. If I am doing something that is deemed as worship of something else, even though I don't have that intention, is that okay or not? You write that down, send it to your marja's office online. They all have, mashallah, websites now. You ask that question, see what the answer comes. And you might want to give some examples as well, right? Now, for example, I think maybe in the some Sunni schools of thought, fiqhi Sunni schools of thought, maybe some of them will say even the karate bow, when they bow to each other in karate, maybe that's not even permissible. I don't think that's a problem in Shia school. I'm not 100% sure. As I said, these are things that we have to ask our marja' taqleed, see what the fatwa is in that regard. This is very important. What I spoke about was just theoretical. I wasn't trying to say that Islam doesn't allow it anyway. No, we have to see. I mean, right now, when you go to the haram of the imams, for example, you will see, and you and I do it too. We fall to the ground when we reach the blessed grave of the imam, and we kiss it. Yes? Now someone might see that and say, oh, that's a problem, oh, this, that. No, not necessarily. We follow our maraji'. We have to see what they say. I don't think any marja' says if you fall down to kiss the entrance of or the door of the grave of, for example, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, that's going to be a problem. I don't think that's the case. Every case is different. You need to ask your marja' taqleed on that. The only point I wanted to make was to dissect this for you a little bit and show that there's different layers to this. Sometimes it's shirk. That's if you have the intention that the polytheists had during the Prophet's time. Of course, none of the Muslimin have such an intention in this day and age. Now, the next layer was you don't have the intention, and what you're doing, though, is seen as shirk. Okay? I said that might be a problem sometimes, although it's not shirk for you. Yeah, in your heart. It might be a haram act only, and sometimes it might not even be a haram act. I gave you the example of karate, I gave you the example of the zari of the imams, and so on and so forth. Each case is different. It has to be asked from your marja' taqleed. Okay, once again, I thank all of you for tuning in. I also thank the Atlanta community for this past weekend's course. I mean, more and more cities are asking for the courses that Mizan alhamdulillah has to offer, and if you guys also need to hold one in your city, you feel that there are enough people who would want to benefit from such a thing, please just contact Mizan Institute and they'll set it up, inshallah, based on availability of instructors. Okay, with that, I'm going to leave you for 2 weeks, inshallah. Keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.